By now, it's well understood that there's something dreadfully wrong about our modern societies, often expressed or alluded to under the umbrella term of the mouse utopia experiments, even if the people invoking it have little or no knowledge of John B. Calhoun's actual eponymous work. Recently, I've spoken at considerably greater length than I'd originally set out to on the eternal game being played between the forces of order, aka truth or reality, and chaos, aka random noise or entropy. I've also expressed my belief that true randomness does not, and indeed cannot, exist in a deterministic universe. That is, in a universe wherein it is at all possible to reliably predict future events based on previous patterns. It is physically impossible to have true random disorder, since this would necessitate the existence of a causal events, aka magic. I've also gone on many a crusade against the many inequities, improprieties, and incongruencies inherent in any sort of moralistic framework that depends in any aspect, fashion, or dimension on faith for its legitimacy. And veterans of this channel will have heard me say before that people tend to worship the forces or entities they believe hold most sway over their lives and venerate whatever procedures, either concrete or abstract, they believe will let them tap into these supernal powers for their own use. From this angle, we can see there's no functional difference between the beliefs and practices of the Eastern mystics, the Indo-European pagans, Abrahamic disciples, or the new secular ideologues, where the Jews, Christians, and Muslims all revere some version of God as the origin point of all things natural and real and venerate prayer as the vehicle for communion with this ultimate benefactor. The communists likewise worship the state, aka the government, as their universal spawn point and thus venerate all the policies and procedures that stem from and lead to it. As evidence, you might have noticed the modern media commandment to trust the science, even though there is no such thing as the science, has essentially the same ring to it as the various Abrahamic articles to put your trust in God. But belying all of this is still another common thread I've hitherto missed on addressing directly. Every observable phenomena, both in physics and in metaphysics, is composed of three fundamental ingredients: the locus, the thing which acts, the impetus, the initializing force or original cause for action, and the animus, the interfacing mechanism between the locus and the impetus. In this instance, institutions are the bodies which compose the scaffolding of society, and thus are the foremost battlefront for every ideological, cultural, or political conflict ever waged. This is why every reformist or revolutionary movement down the centuries has, in various manners, paid homage to Machiavelli's infamous Long March through the institutions. It is understood by all who would seize the mantle of first law over a certain national state that, just as how in a kinetic war, it is vital to starve the enemy of resources by controlling or destroying the various causeways, thoroughfares, and production centers. In a culture war, the faction that has a dominant sway over a nation's educational, financial, and media sectors holds as much, if not more power over said civilization than any number of soldiers or politicians. Give me control over a nation's wealth, and I care not who makes its laws. Meyer Amschel Rothschild. I know I've used this quote before, but in my defense, I'm not the one who keeps making it relevant. Now, I've already said my piece quite thoroughly on religion, on the difference between it and philosophy, and of philosophy and science, and why I believe the second to be objectively superior to the first in every way, but only when partnered with the third. More recently, I mentioned how most people don't really want or care about the truth. They just want power. I've said also that power does not corrupt, only enables. For the same reason that if you hand a peaceful person a gun, they don't go on a GTA-style rampage, a saintly moderate won't suddenly become a malefic tyrant when put into political office. Other content creators like Wati Falthist and Nick Freitas have mentioned how the new religions of the postmodern world tend to center around states and technology, as opposed to the old orthodoxies, which worshipped gods and venerated magic. Both are wholly concerned with obtaining a monopoly on information, as it is beliefs that inform actions, and so by controlling the popular perception, you can control the direction of the culture. Of course, like I've also said, this works as a form of mass hypnosis, which only works so long as there's no active resistance to what you're suggesting. I.e., you can't hypnotize or propagandize someone into doing something they're naturally predisposed not to do, and as soon as they become aware of your programming, the spell is broken. Like any other tool, ideas are only valuable insofar as they're useful. Once their use is spent, people abandon them. This is why people change religions. When their old gods don't answer their prayers, they search for new ones. This is why, in the era of the all-encompassing machine states, the new religions are no longer those of gods and natural magics, but of institutions and narrative influence. Have you ever noticed how, apart from some superficial differences in rhetoric and subtle gradations in their levels of hypocrisy, America's political wings are mirror images of each other? And if so, have you ever wondered what caused this to be so? Well, wonder no more, because the right has actually already answered this question for me. Although, being as they are also religious fundamentalists, just of a more quaint sort, they're either too stupid or too simple, which, yes, are in fact two very different things, to understand the full scope of the implications. In gist, the progressive left and the religious right share the same foundational moral and ethical core, though neither side wants to acknowledge or accept this as meaning they're both two sides of the same obsolete coin. But let's not jump ahead of the wagon. First things first. Just what is meant by a religion. Specifically, what distinguishes it from philosophy or science? Well, if we think of science as our map of reality, then philosophy could be described as our metaphysical itinerary, and spirituality, both of a secular and religious sort, would be our map's compass rose, legend, and scale. The problem with this analogy, you'll notice, is that we still lack a method of objective orientation, and therein indeed lies our great problem. People want what's in their own best interests. We'll think of this as the X-marked spot on our map. It's the end state we're ultimately trying to reach, which, on the big picture end of the spectrum, usually manifests as some iteration of the perfect world, be it utopia or heaven or nirvana or Shangri-La or whatever. Though on the personal scale, it's usually something a bit more earthly like I want to be an astronaut, or I want to get married and have children, etc. But in all events, in order to find that place, we first need to know where we currently stand in order to construct a workable itinerary, which is just a list of destinations and times for those who don't travel much. Since we don't have infinite time or energy, and since going backwards or remaining static aren't options, and anybody claiming to have perfect or absolute knowledge about reality is either a fool, a liar, or, more often than not, both. The inevitable consequence is that most of us end up flying by the seat of our pants for pretty much most of our lives, with little more than the accumulated wisdom of the crowd and our own senses and natural inclinations to navigate by. Since I am genuinely still trying, if not finding particular success, in offering solutions rather than just spilling out more problematic algorithm fodder, I'm going to round this off with a passage from a book very inauspiciously titled Outline of Philosophy, Volume 1, slightly abridged for the sake of brevity. To wit, in the religious mind which evolved these ideas, God and soul are entertained with warmth and thought of in terms of spirituality. The relation between the soul and God is experienced with emotion, considered in a personal way, and usually marked by a certain amount of moral enthusiasm. The spirit of the relationship is that of worship, which obviates the necessity of any deep psychology of the soul or any penetrating ontology or metaphysics of the deity. But when philosophy, instead of manufacturing entirely new notions of its own, lays hold to the traditional conceptions of spiritual life, it changes soul into mind and God into being or substance. That which is lost is the warmth of those original conceptions and their religious worth. What is gained is clearness and consistency. When this transmutation has been made, the whole case thus undergoes a change of venue from the anthropic to the cosmic. What was the soul, with all its human needs and aspirations, is now a thinking principle, while the former God has become the world ground. The situation is philosophical instead of humanistic, and the problem of mankind is to solve the question of the absolute, rather than to enter into right, joyous, and fruitful relations with the God of mankind's ancestors. Now, what with pretty much every human who's ever lived having been faced with pretty much the same set of fundamental problems to solve as every other one of their kind, you'd think we'd have this whole human condition thing wrapped up in a neat and tidy ribbon by now. And, well, the thing is, we technically do. The problem is that while we all more or less want the same things, power, status, wealth, security, etc., with the world and its resources being finite and our wants being infinite, we can't all have everything we want at the same time. This being the case is why we're in perpetual competition with one another, since one of us having more will always entail someone else getting less. The same is true for factions, nations, states, tribes, etc. And since the first and foremost priority of any institution or faction, whether it be commercial, political, or cultural in nature, is functionally irrelevant, is to perpetuate and ultimately to procreate itself due to the fractal symmetry of the universe. which is the observed fact that complex systems tend to reflect the same general spirit of their components, such as an organism sharing the same ultimate goals as its cells, a government sharing the broader aspiration to advance itself by defanging its rivals as its individual members, etc. and so forth. Someone posted this video over on the channel Discord server outlining an alternate theory on the origin of money to the one we've all been taught in school. I'll put a link to it in the description as it's not wholly relevant to the point I'm currently making. The reason I bring it up is because people get extremely butthurt with me when I keep harping on the current economic situation, seemingly at the expense of all social, political, and cultural considerations. The reason I do is this: you need food to live. You need money for food. If you don't have food, you don't have a society. Without society, you have no culture. Therefore, culture and politics are both the byproducts of economics, not the other way around. Since it is in man's inmost nature to worship that which runs his life and to venerate that which grants him power over the same, even if it's only illusory, faith in the post-industrial age has been transferred to the material mechanisms of social and technological advancement, as it's only by communing with and harnessing the powers of his own intellect that men can truly move up in the world anymore. In other words, both the left and the right worship the state and venerate the systems of influence that give it authority to govern. Notice how both sides are obsessed with controlling elections, the media, the Federal Reserve, the culture, academia, etc. This isn't to say both are equal, but they are still both just a bunch of overdressed monkeys throwing poop at each other, same as always. As I've said before, the concept of putting a circuit board in my brain doesn't alarm me all by itself. The fact that it will be designed and built by someone other than me who doesn't have my best interests in mind is why it's never going to happen so long as I have any say in the matter. No matter how fervently people want to protest otherwise, truth is too good what the laws of motion are to general relativity. The one holds to static, concrete variables, while the other is flexible and tends to warp the very fabric of the mind who attempts to comprehend it in absolute terms. This is why all religious loons always end up talking themselves into convoluted knots when confronted with the problem whose practical solution lies outside the boundaries of their moral paradigm. But I've beaten that dead horse enough for it to be considered a sin against rationality itself. So let me know your thoughts on this down below. And of course, be sure to like the video and subscribe while you're down there as well. Check out my books and merch and all the other stuff on screen at the links in the description. And as usual, until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, when you see and hear things other people don't, you're insane. When you hear and see what they want, you're a prophet. When you see and hear things they don't want to know, you're a liar. And when you see and hear what they don't want you to know, you're a demon who must be purged with holy fire. Peace be upon you.